Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Good morning. I'm Heather Clancy. I'm a senior writer with GreenBiz, and I'm really happy to be here. We are going to talk about water and the drought here in California. Have a seat, Peter. This is one of my panelists. This is not a panel about traffic, but it could be. Our other speaker, Felicia Marcus, is on her way. I'm told she's converging on the hotel, but in the interest of time, we're going to get started with our conversation. I have with me one of the foremost thinkers on water science and on conservation issues, Peter Gleick, with the Pacific Institute. You were the co-founder of the Institute?
Yes.
And I'm a Jersey girl. I don't live here. So I don't really understand this whole drought thing. I'm serious. I mean, you hear about it all the time in New Jersey, but you know, for someone on the East Coast, we're kind of confounded by the issues out here. We understand there's a big problem. But what I was hoping that Peter could start off by doing was to help me really understand, you know, how big of a deal is this? You know, how constrained is the supply, and just how urgent is this problem here in California?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm not going to make you stand up and make paper elephants, but I would like to know, just raise your hand if you're not from California. Oh, goodness. Good. So each one of you got the memo that you were supposed to bring a bag of water when you came, and you can deposit it outside the room, and we'll put it to good use, I promise.
Turn off the spigot when you're brushing your teeth.
And don't let the water run when you're brushing your teeth. So we're also confounded by water. I'm not going to pretend that we really know what we're doing either, but here's a quick overview. California's in a very bad drought. There you go.
So is New Jersey, by the way.
It's been 4 years. It's the 4th year of a drought. And the best definition of a drought is that we don't have enough water to do the things that we want to do. Now, by that definition, one could argue that the Western US is now always in a drought. We really no longer have enough water to do the things that we want to do the way we're doing them today. And that may be another way to think about that, and maybe we can come back to talk about that. But it's been extraordinarily dry. We've had very little rain. Last year was the lowest snowpack on record, and we get a lot of our water in the form of snow in the winter. Our reservoirs have been drawn down, the reservoirs that we built to get us through drought, which they're doing, but it's very persistent, this drought. Soil moisture is low, and temperatures have been extraordinarily high. This hasn't just been a dry drought, it's been a hot drought. And that raises the question about climate change, which, again, perhaps we can come back to.
So help me understand, though. What's been the actual impact? Is it 10% of normal, 1% of normal, 80% of normal? I mean, what's the actual?
So that partly depends on who you ask. Rainfall has been very low. It's been maybe 50, 60% of normal. But that's not really the best measurement. The best measurement probably is, do the people who want water get the water they want? Agriculture, some parts of agriculture have had 100% cutbacks, complete zero deliveries of certain kinds of surface water. Cities have been asked, urban water users have been asked by the governor in the emergency declaration that he's announced to voluntarily and maybe to some degree mandatorily cut back water by about 25% in the cities. The environment gets sort of what's left. And in parts of the state, that's been nothing. And so there have been impacts on agriculture, on the cities, on the environment. Each of the sectors that use water, which is, in truth, all of us, have suffered pieces of the drought.
You mentioned some of the individual constituencies that need water, right, obviously. And each one of them is demanding their own share, their share. Are they demanding more of a share than in the past? Like, for example, is the problem so acute because there's close to 1,000 data centers in California now, and they're competing with the agricultural supply, or is there that dynamic going on? How has the business community been impacted by this? Are they fighting over the supplies?
So actually, let's set aside the drought for a minute. Even without a drought, as I hinted, I think, a minute ago, there's not really enough water for everyone to do what we want. we're running up against what I would describe as peak water in the western US. We take 100% of the flow of the Colorado River, for example. We're over-pumping groundwater unsustainably. We're taking more groundwater out than nature recharges us. So there are physical constraints, hydrological constraints on how much water is available, and so there's competition between the agricultural sector, between the cities, between the environment, all the people who want to use water. Business has done pretty well. Most businesses, most industries get water from municipal agencies and have not really seen cutbacks, except to the extent that we've been asked voluntarily to reduce our water use during the drought. But businesses can pay much more for water than almost anyone else. And so there have been bigger cutbacks in the agricultural sector, although the agricultural sector has actually done reasonably well so far, for reasons perhaps we can get into. But we can't continue to do the things that we're doing, the way we're doing them. And that's, even without a drought, the water challenge we face in California, and I would argue in much of the rest of the world.
Do you feel like the business community is involved in the conversation as much as it needs to be?
No. So, to some extent, the business community, many of you perhaps, think it doesn't really matter. I get the water I want. I can just buy it from my municipal agency. I'm willing to pay much more for it than agriculture. I don't have to worry about it. But another piece of this puzzle is the whole debate about corporate social responsibility and sustainability. And as again, I think many of you know, there's a growing conversation about what's the role of the business sector in managing our resources broadly, more sustainably. Water, energy, air quality, water quality, emissions, all of these issues are tied together. And there are, hold on one moment.
Felicia has entered the building. Sorry to mess up your answer.
An intrusive entrance.
And there are things that the business community ought to be doing to think about how to use water more efficiently, how to make more semiconductors with less water, how to grow more food with less water, how to think about supply chains. It's not just individual companies or individual operations, it's big supply chain implications of water and other resources now. And this is all part of the conversation.
I want to get into some of those specific technologies and strategies in a moment. But Felicia, thanks for being here this morning. One of the things that I was curious about from your perspective as the California water czar, I can say this because it was in the New York Times, which I read, but your title is exactly, your formal title is?
Chair, State Water Resources Control Board.
So you were involved, or have been involved in the decision of how the sort of mandatory conservation measures were dictated, if you will, from community to community. Can you talk about Peter referenced a moment ago the different percentages that people were asked to cut back their use. How was that decided? How was each community approached about their cutbacks, and what has the response been? How people managed to deliver on those cutbacks?
No, happy to, and again, I'm terribly sorry I was late. I always talk about how you can't really predict the weather.
Nope, can't predict traffic.
Google either. Maps doesn't predict the time either, as impressive as it is. Two things. One is, a key thing about those urban conservation regulations that people may not realize is they were based in large part on the fact that we were hitting the 4th year of a drought, right. Worst snowpack in 500 years. We were in Australia territory, where Australia had been in that 3-year drought cycle, more or less, for the same 100 years as we had been, and then they had a 10-year drought. And they said, conserve early, act as if it won't, because they didn't. And then at year 6, they had to do everything. Spent billions, including on desal facilities that have never been used and that they're still paying for. An insurance policy, to be sure, but a very expensive one. So we made a rather bold decision to say, shame on us now if we don't take the better safe than sorry route. And we looked at our major urban centers and thought, well, we're delivering water in bottles and tankers to small communities, and we're drilling wells and running pipe. We can't do that for our large communities, so better to be safe than sorry. So what we did is we came up with a new measure, residential gallons per capita per day because every city has a different mix of commercial and industrial, and we wanted to level the playing field because we knew some communities had been conserving for decades and were using many times less water, not just less water, but many times less water.
Right.
So you might have one community that was using 100 gallons per person per day and another using 500 or 600, just because they hadn't gotten into that. And it wouldn't be fair to do an equal percentage cut. So we did those residential per capita per day, also trying to take commercial industrial out of the mix because we didn't want to hurt the economy. We just wanted people to conserve, and we actually saw the greatest place, you know, from a low cost, don't hurt the economy point of view, outdoor ornamental irrigation, which is on average 50% of urban use, in some places 80% of urban use. And then we did these tiers from 8% to I think 32 or 36%, so that those that were using hundreds of gallons per capita per day, largely that's going to be ornamental irrigation, would cut back the 30-something%. And those communities like, San Diego, LA, who were lower would be more in 16%, and those ones that were crazy low, like San Francisco and Santa Cruz, got the 8%.
Right.
So that's how we did it. So how are we doing? We've been doing really well since then. Remember, we did this because voluntarily only got us about 4% exhortation. Our light touch mandatory that we had done the year before only got us about 10%. We had hoped that ringing the bell would get agencies into gear, but then the mandatory finally got everybody in gear, and in August, on average, Californians saved 31%. Right. And then the month after, which had been a very hot one, it was still up around 28, 29%, which is terrific. And the next month is still looking good. And we really appreciate it. Now, that comes from some people saving a lot more than that.
Right.
And I think this area in particular, you have an awful lot of heroes where the community came together to protect their groundwater basin and actually set their own target that was twice as much as we had asked for.
And when you walked in, we were talking a little bit about the business role, because there's a lot, obviously that's the focus of this. How were you involved with the corporate world, if you will, in helping make that happen? You know, how much did you see them participating in that?
Well, I think in some places quite a bit. In other places, I think there's a lot more that could be done. And I think in the business community, I think certain businesses stepped up to do things like more rebates, advertising on rain barrels and things like that, giving out low-flow device kits and the like. But we crafted this to try and protect the economic base of cities. I think as you're looking towards the long term, which hopefully Peter talked about, I mean, this is the Godzilla of all wake-up calls, because this is exactly what climate change is projected to bring us every year as we lose our snowpack. And so I think there's a tremendous room for the business voice, not only in what they can do within their own sector to try and make sure they're resilient, but to be the powerful voice that they are in the public arena for more intelligent conservation, recycling, stormwater capture, and the like.
I had the opportunity to moderate a panel about data centers a couple of weeks ago on green data centers, and water recycling was one of the topics that sort of got a lot of response, sort of visceral response from the managers. They said that they were looking into this much more seriously than in the past. Google does stuff already, Facebook. How much do you see water recycling technologies playing a role? Like, is this becoming part of the dialogue here? Both of you, Peter, we'll start with you. But is this a realistic approach? Is this a very real opportunity for that sort of technology to play a role?
Okay, so there are 2 points here. One is that everything we do requires water. Data centers require water. And if you build a data center in a place where water is short, you would better think about it. And maybe if you're building it in Norway, where water may be not so short, you worry about it less. The other piece of this is that there are technologies that let us do the things we want with less water. And so we talked a little bit about the social responsibility of companies who use water in their operations. But the other piece of this is the technologies that will help solve our water problems. And data centers that use less water is one way of thinking about that, but there's There's sensors technology, there's water efficiency technology, there's treatment technology, there's data collection and management. It's the other side of the water use problem. It's the water management problem. And there are people in the audience here who have a big water footprint in the businesses that you run because you use a lot of water. But there are other people in this audience who I suspect have solutions that they maybe haven't thought about. And Joel at the beginning said, let's think beyond our little borders. So let's think about water and energy and food and climate and industry and technology all together. And there may be some innovative answers out there.
Is there a similar infrastructure in the state? You know, when energy efficiency was really first becoming into the buzz, if you will, several years ago, people talked about incentives at the state level. Are there similar incentives for technologies that will help with the water management problem? Or is that a dialogue that's starting?
Well, I think that there's a big difference between energy and water in our institutional infrastructure, and I don't want to get too wonky in it. In energy, precisely because the physics of energy require the electrons to continue to flow, you end up with a few big investor-owned utilities that actually cover most of the field, and they're regulated by the CPUC, which regulates a lot more of what they do than anything in the water infrastructure. In water, you have thousands of water agencies delivering water, about 400 and some large ones, over 3,000. Only about 17% of those are regulated by the CPUC, and even these urban conservation regulations we're doing under emergency regulatory authority. So it's a different setup. What we've tried to do with recycling, with the tools we have, is to offer 1% financing early in the drought and streamline the regulations for it, and a lot more recycled water is getting out there. There's a lot of projects waiting in the wings that we were trying to get from the drawing board to on the ground, and they're all in process. There's a tremendous opportunity to increase recycling. We're sending millions of acre feet of really highly treated water that are highly treated for ocean protection and stream protection regulations, we're sending away, and just adding some technology makes it fit for purpose for all kinds of things. So there's a tremendous opportunity there and in stormwater capture to help make cities and communities more resilient. Within plant, there's all kinds, it's not rocket science to treat water, it's just the application of money and energy.
But here's a good parallel.
Yeah.
In the last session, we talked about putting solar panels on roofs, and the point was made that you don't really want to do that if the building you're putting the solar panel on is an energy waster. You want to do the conservation and efficiency also, or at the same time. And the same thing is true for water. We don't want to build new water infrastructure that's really expensive, desalination facilities, a pipeline from God knows where now, until we've become more efficient in our water use. And there are incentives at the local level, at the utility level, at the state level, to use water more efficiently, to install the low flow technologies, the more efficient leak detection technologies that are out there. And that's there are lots of parallels with energy, but that's a really important one.
So it really, the incentives for, like, for example, agricultural use of sensors and trying to get that at a higher level would have to come from the municipal level, from the businesses themselves. They would have to.
For agriculture, not so much the municipal level, but the irrigation district, working with either individual irrigation districts or individual farmers. Right. There are enormous opportunities to grow a lot more food in California with the same amount of water we're using now or less water. This parallel is very, very good.
Okay. I know we have an opportunity for some questions from the sidebar, from you in the room as well as the online audience. What do we got over there, Elaine and Lauren?
Yeah, we've gotten a couple of questions about potential silver bullets in the arena of water scarcity. So, what do you guys think about water pipelines, east-west, or shipping water, and El Nino as our savior?
I'll start on those. It's interesting, I sort of seem to be the collector of the silver bullet ideas, and I won't talk about towing icebergs or other things, but this is one of those things where Sonny McPeak, who was in the water world, still is for a long time, has said there's no silver bullet, there's silver buckshot. And there are a lot of solutions, and Peter's talked about a lot of them eloquently. They're just common sense. The idea of large pipelines from somewhere come in all the time. Number one, no one in other states is offering us their water, as far as I know. And number two, the expense and time and energy costs of pumping that are tremendous. And
energy.
we have far more cost-effective solutions, at least for the next couple of decades, staring us in the face with conservation, recycling, including gray water systems and rooftop capture, stormwater, the stormwater capture, recycling, all of those, and even desal in the appropriate circumstances where those other things are available. We have a long way to go before we need to tap into those. Decades off in the future, everything is on the table.
What she said.
Yeah. And El Nino, I just have to say, it's going to be a challenging messaging year. I'll take all the precipitation we can safely handle and deal with the messaging challenge.
Yeah.
But El Nino is still a prediction. In Southern California, far more likely to get mudslides and water. I think a lot of folks in Southern California don't realize they're still 30% dependent on the Northern California system, where most of our reservoirs are. Through the Delta system. It's predicted, so you've got a 30-40% chance in Northern California that we're going to have higher than average prediction. Those aren't odds I'd bet on yet.
Right.
And it's going to be hotter, so we won't have snowpack. And that snowpack is a huge part of the water picture as it melts out in the spring and summer and refills our reservoirs and our surface streams. I mean, 30% of the storage in an average year is a lot of water.
I would also just add that I'm worried that the idea of an El Nino is going to make us stop thinking about the drought. It's possible we'll get a wet year. We need more than one wet year. But the drought has, in a positive sense, opened doors to some conversations that we haven't had before. And there is this worry that a wet year will make us go back to the old way of doing things, and that wouldn't necessarily be a good thing.
How do you fix that messaging problem? I mean, that does, how can the businesses here really help keep their employees aware of this long-term problem, if you will?
Because businesses take a longer view of their business's future than the general media circus. And so there's an opportunity to look at, a successful business isn't, it's like the Wayne Gretzky thing. And people asked him how he always got to the puck so fast. He said he didn't skate to the puck, he skated to where the puck was going to be. Mm-hmm. And that's what a good business has to do, to be thinking ahead. And that's actually what the state and everyone else should be doing. We don't have a systems view of water the way we ought to and the way other countries have. I just came back from Australia, and they think in terms of, they do 5-year plans, 10-year plans. They're thinking ahead. They're not perfect, but it's an approach that makes much more sense in terms of continuity and looking towards the future. And so I just think that messaging from the business community is actually very important internally, but it is also important because the body politic listens to the business community and understands the idea of creating a viable future for all of our communities, which means taking the public awareness that we've gotten through this drought and holding on to it. I figure we have about a year of drought memory in this one. Folks don't go back. They never do. After the drought of the 80s and 90s, it didn't go back to where it was. In Australia, even though it rained and poured, didn't go back to where it was. So we'll get some enduring savings, but it really is going to take messaging, and you all are the mega charismatic voice for that, I think.
One more question from the sidebar.
Yeah, just on the maybe slightly more practical side of things, where is California with desalination technology and direct reuse?
So we know how to desalinate water. We've known for a long time. There are thousands of desalination plants around the world. We're building one big one in California that's supposed to open finally this year at Carlsbad. We're debating a few others. It's really expensive. It's far more expensive than smart water conservation and efficiency, water reuse, all of the other things that we have in our water portfolio. I do think in the long run there will be more desalination in California. I just don't think now is necessarily the right time to do that. And as Felicia mentioned, Australia went through a 9 or 10-year severe drought. They built 6 major desalination plants for $10 billion. 4 of which are now mothballed because the water they produce is too expensive and they don't really need them right now. Now, that's a big sunk cost, and I think we should not sink that cost until we've done the things that are cheaper, faster, and more environmentally sound first.
Does water cost enough money?
Well, that's a hard one to say for people who are. I spend a lot of time with poor people who can't afford their water, so it's. I think it's a trade-off. I mean, water pricing does make a difference, and I do think. But I do think a portfolio approach is what makes sense. A part of that question also talked about direct potable reuse, which is something that's out there. Just so that folks know, we are in the process with an expert panel on setting new regulations. They'll be in by next year sometime on indirect potable reuse, surface water augmentation. We've already done streamlined regs for indirect potable reuse groundwater recharge, which this region is a leader in. Direct potable reuse, we will have a feasibility report out from the experts. For some people, that is the panacea. You could just plug in your pipes that you already have. I think people need to go slow on that because the first entity to make a mistake ruins recycled water for everyone. And more importantly, from a GHG standpoint, the idea of fit-for-purpose water makes more. It doesn't make sense to treat water to pristine drinking water standards and then use it to flush our toilets and overwater our lawns. So some thinking.
2 short answers here because we're already over time. But what can other states learn from California's situation? What should they learn, and how can they get ahead of it?
Well, conservation is king. Conservation comes first, I think, and we do lead the nation in that. But also integrated water management, the fact that coming together across disciplines to think about flood control, water supply, water quality, and urban greening in the same conversation, I think is something that is a kind of systems thinking that everyone can look at. The idea of looking at water as the precious resource that it is isn't just for California in a drought.
I would say don't take water for granted. Even if you live in New Jersey, I grew up in the East Coast, I remember a bad drought. We've taken water for granted. We don't treat it as the valuable resource that it is. And there are smart things that ought to be done from the institutional point of view, from the economic and pricing point of view, from the technology point of view. We know what we need to do, but we're not yet doing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank them, please, for their time.